Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Anthony Fung here,
This is Anton Peterson. This is Two Drummers Podcast.
and this is the podcast where it's two drummers and we're just talking about music and life. And we want to introduce you to our first podcast ever worldwide. And thank you so much for joining us today. How you doing, Anton?
I'm good, brother. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good. Today, we want to just basically talk about our backgrounds and just give you a little backstory to how we came into music and our lives and how we met each other. So why don't you start, Anton?
All right. So, Anthony, I was working at this really killer jazz bar in downtown called the Blue Whale. And Anthony was part of what was it?
The Thelonious
Monk Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And he's such an amazing drummer and such a nice guy that over a period of time, is it a year? A year long was the
2 years.
2-year course.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to know him really well from coming into the bar, and we just became really great friends. And because he's a drummer, and I'm a drummer, we just clicked off. So he's just such a great guy.
Yeah. And likewise, when I would go to the Blue Whale, that was one of my favorite spots and still is one of the best jazz clubs in all of Los Angeles. To get a chance to be a musician, but not only be a musician, but have conversations with people that worked at the Blue Whale, it kind of felt more like a community. And Anton was a big part of making myself and others feel that way. So we, after a while, we started talking about drums, and we started sharing some ideas about double bass drum and jazz chops and fusion chops and stuff like that. And that's kind of where our relationship started.
So let me ask you, what drove you to the drums as opposed to other instruments?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. When I was 10 years old, I watched a movie called Drumline. Do you know this movie, Drumline?
I do.
Yep. So this movie, Nick Cannon, I saw that movie and I was immediately just dumbfounded by how amazing drums were. And the next week I asked my mom and said, can I take drum lessons? And she said, sure. And luckily there was a local music store called Cosmo Music back in Richmond Hill, where I'm from in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. And I started taking drum lessons right away. And when I went to high school, there was a high school drum line, and that's kind of where it all started off for me. So I was in a drum line and I was performing with this drum line, and it was kind of my first experience being around so much talent and all these other students that also had a passion for music and drums. And that's where I met a good friend of mine, Joe, where he introduced me to jazz music. And from then I was just hooked. So at the time, I was also listening to a lot of Dream Theater. I was listening to a lot of punk rock, like Blink-182 and Sum 41 and Simple Plan. And I was just hooked. So I just decided to make drumming my career. I went to Berklee College of Music for 3 years and studied with some of the world's greatest musicians. Moved to New York for a little bit, and then I came out to LA to study and pursue my master's in UCLA at the Monk Institute. And what about yourself? Tell me about your process and your story about drums.
Well, drums started, it was kind of like a on and off thing. Like when I was a young kid, my neighbor, this guy named Kenny, was really killer jazz drummer. He was like older than me, but he was like he was in the big band in high school. And I used to watch him play all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to play. And my brother had a drum set down in the basement, but I never really got to play it.
Mm-hmm.
So around 4th grade in my elementary school is when you can start playing drums. And at that particular time, my mom had put me in a private school that had no music. Oh, wow. So I was unable to get going on the drums until I was probably like 13 or 14, where my grandmother gave me like a practice pad to just.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. And my brother used to work with this church, and he used to live across the street from this church. And I think I was probably like 13 or 14. And I used to go to his house and then go to this church and try and figure out how to play the drums.
Wow.
And the church drummer at the time kept hearing me play and trying to figure out stuff. And he was really supportive, and he would just let me jam on his drums all the time. And then finally I figured out how to play something at least steady. And then I showed my mom and my brother that I could actually do it. And so they said if I whatever money I come up with, that they'll match it so I could get my first drum kit.
Wow.
Yeah. So from pretty much from that point on, I just would practice and practice and practice and practice and practice.
Mm.
And I was in my first metal band when I turned like right before I turned 19. I was in my first metal band.
Wow.
And I was playing all over Seattle. And then I left Seattle and I moved to Arizona, and I was kind of just playing in local things, and decided to take it to the next level and like move to California. And I went to Musicians Institute for 3 years. And then I went and transferred to Cal Arts as a jazz major.
Wow.
And then I also studied with like guys like Marco Miniman and
Wow.
some other really amazing
Drummers.
killer,
Right.
killer
Totally.
drummers. And then, I just kind of have like a drive to practice. So I'm like a practice hound.
Yeah. I mean, it
So-
seems that way. Your routine is, I mean, every single time I talk to you, you're always talking about routine and how you're able to, get faster with your feet. Your feet are getting faster, too fast for me. You know what I mean? I can't even see at the speed of light.
It's to me it's like therapeutic practice. So
Absolutely.
so it allows me to get kind of like focus my mind on something that's really positive and keep my brain function really good, and I always kind of strive for that next level of whatever I'm doing. I try not to get caught up in comparing myself to
others. Yeah.
to that that top tier. It's really difficult though.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Especially now in the world where we have Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, the access to technology and to view other drummers from all around the world makes you think like, wow, these people are practicing 30 times harder than I am. Like, what am I doing? Watching Netflix all day,
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can practice in a day without getting totally fried out. And I know there's guys that practice like hours upon hours, and I've been that person. And there's definitely, if it's focused, you can do it, right? Like as long as you take breaks and you focus and like but you can really fry yourself out. Like I've practiced 5, 6, 7 hours a day sometimes.
Oh, that's great.
But man, you can fry yourself hard.
Right. and that's definitely something I'd like to talk about with you and to our listeners at home, just about practice and how it's important not to, like you said, fry yourself out. I think everybody works and practices in their own way and pace, and it's important to understand that we're all built differently. And we all have different attention spans. And it's okay if sometimes we have half an hour to practice or sometimes we have
Absolutely.
2 hours to practice. And for anybody that's listening and that's a drummer, just know that you're not alone. There are people around the world that can practice 10 hours a day. And there are other drummers that can only practice half an hour. It doesn't matter. It's definitely your own journey and your own process, and not to get bombarded with social media, and just to stay true to your process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one other question before we cut this episode down. Drumline. You said drumline. Like, so, because you're a really killer jazz drummer, how did your drumline experience help with your drum kit?
Well, it was definitely it was a tough transition for sure, because drumline has such a specific technique. The technique is very rigid. It's very tight. A lot of the times when you're in a drumline, you're almost a machine, because you have to look just like all the other 20, drummers in that drumline. You have to all look the same. Our instructor would have us pick a point directly across from where we were looking, and just pick a point, and that way we would always just be facing forward. We had a very specific way to hold our sticks, and our grip has to be, shaped in a 90-degree angle. And in that way, especially learning traditional grip, for those who don't know what traditional grip is at home, it's a grip where you're basically putting your stick and resting it on the fulcrum between your thumb and your index finger, and the stick rests on the nail of your ring finger. And it's kind of an old traditional way of playing drums that was popularized by a lot of drummers in the marching band, kind of signaling the army to go to war. Um,
And that had a lot to do with the angle of the
and
drum, right?
exactly the angle of the drum, the drum was actually on a sling that was held over by the shoulder. So a lot of times, if you played the drum with the match grip, your shoulder would probably let out on you after five seconds. So that's why they just had a more comfortable grip with the traditional grip. But to your question, when I played traditional grip on the drum set, it's not true that just because you have good chops on a snare drum, you're going to have good chops on the drum set. It's a completely different touch. So it took a long time to kind of build that touch over and over again, and a lot of that had to deal with learning about dynamics and practicing singles and doubles around the drum set a lot quieter.
So what's your favorite rudiment?
Oh, what's my favorite rudiment? Let me see. I like the paradiddle. I like single strokes too.
Single strokes,
Yeah.
paradiddles?
What about you?
Singles and doubles, man.
Singles
That's
and doubles all day.
long. I mean, there's all the other ones are like useful in parts,
Mhm.
but singles and doubles, if you do singles and doubles at like really solid speeds
Right.
with good control, then the other stuff is like the icing.
Mm.
So
Awesome. Well, awesome, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening. This concludes our first episode
thank you
of
guys.
Two Drummers. And signing out, this is Anthony Fung.
This is Anton Peterson. We're two drummers.
And
Thanks, guys.
we'll see you next time.
Peace.